Real estate in New York and New Jersey is deeply entrenched in organized crime and corrupt pay-to-play governments. Bribery and blackmail are just a normal part of state contracting. There exists a concentration of Zionist ideologues profiting from the gambit and using their wealth to assist a foreign government with its political aims. Crooks are using the state to enrich themselves and then using this wealth to further the interests of the Israeli regime and its grip over American money, media, and military power. President Trump himself and his extended family, with Charles and Jared Kushner in particular, are serving the financial and ideological aims of the Israeli state. Controlling property predicates other revenue streams for criminality. And these organized crime connections float all the way back to the Robert Kennedy assassination. In Israel, they say God granted them land. Well, God is not a real estate agent. Real estate agents involved in state contracting and organized crime, however, do act like the devil. The Democrats are out chasing Russian ghosts instead of nailing down these concrete criminal connections because they can't do otherwise, since they are involved in the very same syndicates and the very same activities. Using government to enrich itself and its riches to bribe government officials, a den of criminal real estate moguls comprise a regional oligopoly. This cabal then empowers a federal lobby on behalf of a foreign state. AIPAC depends on these donors for the bulk of its power. Also under its wing is a who's who of organized crime. Without vast corporate welfare, it could not continue. Eric Trump reports that his father's decision to bomb a Syrian airbase was influenced by his sister Ivanka's reaction to the horrible gas attack. Either Ivanka fell for the atrocity propaganda that uniformly blamed Assad without motive or evidence, while also ignoring precedent, because we've heard these lies before, or she's part of it. I don't recall her being heartbroken for the dead Palestinian children, or Iraqis, or the thousands starving in Yemen. Of course, none of that was on the White Helmet's film rolls, and it would never see airtime on the Zionist mass media. The fact that she's married to one of the Holocaust builders' clans, to Jared Kushner no less, the son of a convicted felon who just got out of jail in 2006, may mean that there is an ideological dog in this fight. The Israelis had recently tried to penetrate into Palmyra in mid-March of 2017, and they were repelled by the very same airbase that Trump later attacked with cruise missiles. After burning bridges in New Jersey, the Kushners bought 666 Fifth Avenue in New York for $1.8 billion, the highest price paid for an individual building at the time. It was a very unconventional price for such a short building. The 666 at the top has been replaced with the Citigroup logo. In other words, a synonym. Citigroup was the largest recipient of bailouts from the 2008 housing bubble crash. Their corruption fits perfectly with the Kushner clan. So who or what are the Holocaust builders? How did the Kushner clan burn bridges in New Jersey? And why did Jared's billionaire father, Charles, the dawn of the Holocaust builders, end up in federal prison? What's their relationship with the state of Israel? First, you need to know a bit about New Jersey and organized crime. The most successful mobsters don't avoid the law, they work with the law. God is not a real estate agent, but the devil is. No matter what the planned crimes are, narcotics, prostitution, gambling, or something bigger. The first order of business is controlling property. As researcher and writer Douglas Valentine said of the CIA in regards to Vietnam and Ukraine, the first move they make is real estate. They have to have a base of operations.
Well, the first thing they always do is buy a lot of property. And they do this clandestinely, so that they have places where they have safe houses, they have places to set up organizations later on. It's always best for them to buy real estate during times of crisis.
Real estate itself is a very lucrative business, not only in residential and commercial markets, but also in infrastructure. And the key to controlling that is the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And in order to get on that, you've got to pay to play. New Jersey is particularly susceptible to the gambit of pay to play, with more than 600 school districts and 566 municipalities, and each one of these has to hire an accountant, a lawyer, an administrator, and the positions end up being divvied out as rewards for donations. Alan Marcus, the founder of the political consulting company The Marcus Group, told The New Yorker, "In New Jersey, you contribute money not for access, but results. Anybody who doesn't admit that is lying." Speaking of the governor of 2002, Jim McGreevey, he said, "From day one of the McGreevey office, everything became a fix again. You couldn't discuss a policy issue with them. They were only interested in who was the contributor and who they had to take care of." The mobster John Gotti brought too much attention to himself, and so did Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner. It's not often that a billionaire goes to jail, but it does happen. If you want to be the king of Gotham, you have to control the Port Authority. The Port Authority Board is appointed by New York and New Jersey governors. Since the chairman of the board is appointed by the New Jersey governor, as well as commissioners, the way in is by gaining influence over the governor of New Jersey. Before moving forward, I want to stress a point. That members of a group engage in ethnic nepotism or hold supremacist beliefs obviously does not mean everyone else belonging to that group shares in their belief or behavior. Likewise, opposing such nepotism is not prejudice, it's just calling a spade a spade. It's not anti-white, for example, to oppose white supremacy, and it's not anti-Semitic to oppose Zionism. But again and again, Jewish supremacists will use this canard of anti-Semitism to defend what is in actuality their own prejudiced behaviors.
Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people and they have power, money, and media and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism, and it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.
The Port Authority of New Jersey and New York is Zionist occupied. That is just a fact. At the time of the September 11th attacks, Port Authority chairman was Louis Eisenberg. Eisenberg authorized the World Trade Center lease transfer to Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowry. He was a partner at Goldman Sachs. He has been a member of the planning board for United Jewish Appeal and the United Jewish Federation. His senior advisor at the Port Authority was Michael Glassner, the Southwest Regional Political Director for AIPAC. One of the long-standing and current commissioners who was appointed by McGreevy is David Steiner, the former president of AIPAC, the most powerful lobby in the United States. David Steiner got himself into a bit of trouble. In a phone conversation, he was recorded saying, "I got, besides the $3 billion, they're looking for Jewish votes, and I tell them whatever he wants to hear. Besides the $10 billion in loan guarantees, which is a fabulous thing, $3 billion in foreign and military aid, I got almost $1 billion in other goodies that people don't even know about." He goes on to brag how much leverage he has and insiders he has, which are key in shaping U.S. foreign policy. Another commissioner who actually had a brand new job title in a position that was created out of thin air and was given a $150,000 salary, appointed by Chris Christie, is David Wildstein. Behind Christie's back, he set up a website called politickernj.com, which got financial support from Jared Kushner, who also owns the New York Observer newspaper, and who is the son of Charles Kushner, now son-in-law of President Donald Trump. Their goal was to derail Christie, and of course, Weinstein pled guilty to conspiracy over Bridgegate, where they shut down 2 of the 4 lanes on the George Washington Bridge, which caused enormous traffic problems that allegedly to punish the mayor of Fort Lee, New Jersey for not endorsing Christie. But according to Jared Kushner's own emails with Wildstein, it was a, quote, badass move and meant to derail Christie. Chris Christie, of course, would be the man who would prosecute Jared Kushner's father, Charles.
Governor McGreevy's top political fundraiser was arrested today on obstruction of justice and related federal charges. New Jersey-based developer Charles Kushner is charged with hiring a prostitute to blackmail 2 witnesses in a federal investigation where he is a target. State House correspondent Jim Hooker has the story.
Kushner, a major Democratic campaign contributor and political player who'd served briefly on the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and was once nominated by Governor McGreevy to head the authority's board, sat in handcuffs before a U.S. magistrate in federal court in Newark. He's charged with attempting to intimidate witnesses in a separate probe by the U.S. Attorney's Office involving his real estate holdings and federal campaign contributions.
Mr. Kushner engaged in a conspiracy with co-conspirators to hire prostitutes to entice witnesses who were cooperating with the federal investigation into engaging in sex acts with those prostitutes and to have those sex acts then videotaped.
After the taping, according to the complaint, Kushner then arranged to have the tape and still pictures taken from it sent to the cooperating witness's wife. Attempts to catch another witness on videotape with the prostitute failed when the witness didn't go with the woman, who authorities say Kushner personally recruited from New York City after 2 accomplices failed to find one. He paid $37,000 to the call girl and the accomplices.
The Port Authority seems to have a revolving door with Goldman Sachs, and its commissioners are always getting into legal trouble or hatching financial schemes. New Jersey and New York governors who appoint the PA brass are often in the same boat. So it shouldn't be shocking that the people they appoint are shady. Take New Jersey Governor Jim Corzine, for example. He was the CEO of Goldman Sachs and then MF Global, which he ran into bankruptcy after using customer funds to pay creditors for silly bets he made on European sovereign debt. Corzine was a business partner of the now convicted felon Charles Kushner in an offer to buy the New Jersey Nets basketball team. The governor said no when they wanted to use the state to help offset the cost for purchasing the team. No was not an answer that Charles Kushner was used to, especially from McGreevey, who he had already given $1.5 million. And as it turns out, not only did Kushner use the carrot, he also carried the stick. If bribes failed, there was always blackmail. Kushner's favorite tactic was the honey trap. What he did could be a Hollywood movie if Hollywood was interested, or at least an episode of Trailer Park Boys. Governor McGreevey had a weakness. He was a closet homosexual. On a trip to Israel, McGreevey met his lover, Golan Sipel. At the time, Jim was a mayor with aspirations to become governor. Sipel moved to America, to New Jersey, and his work visa was sponsored by none other than Charles Kushner. For McGreevey, who would later be blackmailed by the Israeli national and outed, this relationship with Sipel turned out to be a real pain in the butt. Was Kushner pulling the strings? Why else did Sipel demand that any settlement include a charter for the Touro College Medical School? Everyone knew that Kushner was a Touro benefactor and wanted to help fund a medical school so he could name it after his mother. McGreevey had set up his lover, a foreign national with a six-figure salary, by appointing him to be the head of Homeland Security just a month after becoming governor. He also appointed a new chairman for the Port Authority, none other than Charles Kushner. Remember that this was in 2002, and just months prior was the horrible September 11th terrorist attacks. The World Trade Centers were physically gone, and the Port Authority would decide what would replace them. The terrorist attack greatly benefited New Jersey, and Kushner in particular. Ask yourself, since all those offices were destroyed, where did all of those businesses go? Well, mostly to New Jersey waterfront. New Jersey got 15,400 new jobs, and Kushner so happened to construct 5 million square feet of office space. And the first to move was Goldman Sachs. Imagine my lack of shock. I'll circle back to 9/11 in a bit because there's a lot here to go over. Moving companies, the Jewish agency, loans, real estate. Put it this way, that Jared Kushner's New York Observer was the first paper in America to report the bogus lies about anthrax post 9/11, which lied about an Iraq Al-Qaeda connection and had notes that read "Death to America, Death to Israel," should not come as a shock. The Kushners financed settlements in Israel. There was an Al-Qaeda connection, all right, but it wasn't Iraq. And yeah, there were Middle Easterners celebrating the attack, but they weren't Muslim, and they weren't Arab. There was a New Jersey senator calling for an independent inquiry into 9/11, Robert Torricelli. He stated, "President Bush has suggested that we hold private hearings regarding the 9/11 tragedy. This is not how we conduct the government. Our accountability is to the people of our country. Yet the administration claims that such hearings would be a distraction from the war on terrorism. That is not our history or how we conduct our government. Accountability is at the core of any representative government. This nation needs an independent board of inquiry to determine the events of September 11th. An investigation must be conducted by an independent board of inquiry to determine what problems need to be addressed in U.S. agencies responsible for intelligence. Simply leaving this inquiry to the White House and Senate Intelligence Committees would not provide the impartial investigation needed. Those committees have had continuing oversight for the very intelligence agencies they would be investigating. Thus, they would not provide the fresh perspective an independent board would bring to the issue. After doing that, the Kushner New York Observer and the always loyal neocon mouthpiece, the New York Times, began trashing the senator. Was he involved in Alan G. Havesi's pension scandal? Yeah, he was. After all, he's a Jersey politician. All of them have skeletons. That's why they can be leveraged, and that's why they get financed to run for office in the first place. Here's something interesting. Jamie Foxx, no relation to the actor, served as his chief of staff for both Torricelli and Jim McGreevey. After things went sour between Leahy and Randy, and with Charles Kushner going to jail in Alabama, Sappel got a job at a PR firm, MWW, which was started by the former New Jersey governor, Jim Israeli Tomato Florio, and Robert Torricelli. Small world. McGreevy's first chief of staff, Gary Taffet, and his chief of counsel, Paul Livingston, both got federally investigated for selling billboards on government land, and another McGreevy fundraiser was extorting contributions in exchange for the government buying land at a better price. That long indictment kept mentioning a quote-unquote state official. As it turned out, state official was none other than the governor, Jim McGreevey. But despite his mountains of corruption as well as everyone around him, McGreevey walked away heroically for having the courage to admit that he was a gay American. Hey, it's America. Minority cards are strong. Forget about the millions of dollars he squandered. Forget about him hiring a foreign national for the Homeland Security, which oversaw New Jersey's nuclear facilities. Forget that while his wife was in the hospital having bed rest after having labor, that he was drinking Jaeger and having an affair in her house in her bed with his aide. Nope, he walked away like a boss. Kushner didn't fare as well. He got nailed for a number of charges: false tax returns, false campaign finance reports, and witness tampering.
What is the answer to the question of why a guy as savvy as Jim McGreevey meets a guy in another country for 45 minutes and brings him over here and hands over this sensitive part of his campaign to him? It doesn't make sense.
David Twersky is at the American Jewish Congress in New York now. When he was editor of the Jewish News, he got to know Golan Sappel and already knew McGreevey and was not alone in his suspicions.
The possibility that there was something between these two, I would say through 2001, started growing on a number of people.
After the newspapers started raising suspicions, Twersky says he heard certain state troopers, upset about the governor's choice of Joseph Santiago as superintendent, were trying to gather proof of a relationship between the governor and his young aide.
I warned him to beware of the fact that state police were probably driving around looking for him at night. He said he was aware of that, but that there was nothing to find because, in fact, he was not gay and not having a sexual relationship with the governor.
Twersky wrote an editorial urging the press and public to lay off Sappel. McGreevey thanked him for it, but then a newspaper article described the governor and Sappel doing a walkthrough together at Sappel's new condo in West Windsor, and Twersky says Charles Kushner took the two of them to New York PR man Howard Rubenstein, who had...
Kushner, the dapper Don of the Holocaust builders, nicknamed after the attention-seeking, reckless John Gotti, the most idiotic mob boss to ever grace New York, built off an old developer's trick to get around campaign finance laws. In the New Jersey and New York City real estate world, developers do a lot of dirty business. So each time they start a new project, they create a new company with a new name for liability purposes. This way, when they work with the mob or simply cheat with some scam, the ordeal is separated from the main businesses. Kushner made a lot of projects, and thus a lot of companies, over 100 in fact. On behalf of these partnerships, he made political contributions in other people's names without even telling them. This allowed Kushner to give a lot of money and gain a lot of influence over the likes of people like Bill Bradley, John Corzine, Robert Torricelli, and of course, Jim McGreevey. The great thing about egomaniacal greed rats is that you can always rely on them to turn on each other. Kushner ran into trouble with his own partners, one of whom was his older brother, Murray. Murray sued him to get full accounting on the various partnerships, thinking that Charles owed him money. The lawsuit did what no criminal wants. It put the spotlight on Kushner, which led to a U.S. investigation into his campaign financing. Kushner had to pay a $508,900 fine to the Federal Election Commission, but not before going full Jerry Springer. You see, Kushner's sister was taking his side against their older brother, at first at least. However, her husband Billy Schulder worked for Charles, and he had been messing up, so Charles demoted him. Well, then he and his wife flipped sides, and the Dapper Don went off the rails. First, he set Billy up with a honey trap. Here is what went down. Kushner paid a high-end escort to seduce his sister's husband and sleep with him. The ordeal was secretly recorded. The slender blonde was given $10,000 to bait and tape Billy. She met him outside a diner and pretended that her car had conked out. She got Billy to give her a ride. Schulder took the bait, and ever the classy guy took her to the Red Bull Inn, a fancy 2-star motel in Bridgewater. Stay classy, Billy. Stay classy. Wait, there's more. Kushner then mailed the tape to his sister to intimidate them. But all it did was infuriate her. To top it all off, Kushner also suspected his accountant, Robert Yontef, of being a mole for his brother. He believed Yontef was stealing documents at night and giving them to his brother's lawyers. So Kushner did the same thing. He hired a hooker, paying another $10,000 to seduce Yontef. However, he resisted her charms. That, or she already had the money and just didn't try very hard. Needless to say, witness tampering was added to the list of charges. It's obvious that Sapel was a setup. McGreevey must have thought so too, because he brought the FBI into his case. At a level of disorganization worthy of a Pat and Matt episode, a man who was simply a friend of Sapel's sat in on a meeting between legal teams, and not knowing who he was, each team thought he was for the other side. You can have a lot of money and you can buy a lot of things, but you can't buy class. The sheer degree of continuous corruption spanning decades and transcending both parties shows that the Port Authority positions are basically for sale by the New Jersey and New York governments. And the buyers are Zionist clans. They never lose their positions because no matter how many terrible investments they make or criminal charges they get, the government will bail them out because they bribe them or hold blackmail over them. It's pay to play and also play or pay. I hate the term elite. It implies superiority. These government parasites, which would mean a parasite on a parasite, are not talented. They're not clever or smart. In fact, they're quite the opposite. They make reckless, irresponsible decisions all the time. The only reason they maintain their wealth and positions is government favoritism. They're given exclusive contracts that even an idiot could not screw up. Even then, they cheat and make terrible investments costing billions and the government just bails them out. They would be out of business and penniless a long time ago if not for the tax parasite. The Kushners used the housing crisis to cheaply buy up 25,000 apartments. Citigroup, for example, whose logo replaced the 666 on Kushner's tower, received $476.2 billion. That's hundreds of billions, nearly $500 billion. The American people are subsidizing no-talent criminal billionaires who simply coerce the government to keep the system in place. Their children also lack talent. They go to some of the schools with the best reputations because they pay for it. Jared Kushner and his brother were admitted to Harvard because their felon father simply paid them off. Author Daniel Golden wrote a book called The Price of Admission, which exposed the grubby secret of American higher education, that the rich buy their underachieving children's way into elite universities with massive tax-deductible donations. It's a pretty simple scam. And this is exactly what Charles Kushner did for two of his children. He pledged $2.5 million to Harvard University in 1998. But looking at Jared's high school records, he was less than a stellar student. He didn't get into Harvard based on merits. He didn't have the grades. He didn't have high SAT scores. But he and his brother were admitted anyway. On the membership list of Harvard's Committee on University Resources are Charles Kushner and his wife, Sarah Kushner. They were both on the committee. This was all after Charles Kushner had become a convicted felon. Harvard still took the money and enrolled both his children. Charles Kushner's corporate financial officer, Marcy Plotkin, who's also a certified public accountant, pleaded guilty to doctoring tax returns for partnerships of Kushner's companies. Kushner had bribed her with bonuses and even paid for her son's tuition. Also investigated was Richard Stadmar, Cheryl Kushner's brother, who was vice president at Kushner's companies. He would be back in the news in 2016 when he and his wife, as well as a Hebrew day school, loaned a total of $7.8 million to a hedge fund firm, Platinum Partners, which itself is being probed for a kickback scam and for using a shady validation firm. After getting the loans, Platinum's co-founder, Murray Huberfeld, got arrested for bribing Norman Seabrook, the head of New York City's prison guard union. Seabrook was also nabbed. Stabmarl and Huberfeld used to donate to each other's family foundations with matching donations, which is not that all uncommon of an occurrence for these corrupt Yankees. Huberfeld had to resign from his board position at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. He's also a major donor for Chabad Leibovich, that believes Jews are the chosen race of God and everyone else are just rats. Charles Kushner's out of jail now, and he used this time in the slammer to recruit a couple of business partners. Yes, jail was the perfect place to find his kindred. Back in business, Kushner hired two fellow convicts who were in prison for fraud. Both now work for Jared Kushner's company. Avron Lieber was hired in 2009 because that's when he got out of jail. Had been serving a 7-year sentence after he fraudulently promoted himself as a lender and mortgage broker and collected $9 million in advance fees while promising to obtain $2.5 billion in loans for dozens of projects that were never funded. Richard Goldtich got 10 years after pleading guilty to securities fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion back in 1998. He defrauded thousands of investors in a Ponzi scheme involving office equipment leases. In initial order in 1999 to repay the $271 million in fines and refunds was at the time the third largest penalty ever imposed in a security fraud case. So naturally, he's working for the Kushners. Although Jared is married to Ivanka Trump, ironically, the Kushners were huge Clinton supporters. Bill and Hill were as gaffy as McGreevy and extremely susceptible to honey traps. And of course, they were the most openly pay-to-play couple to ever hold political office. Business tycoons work best with the compromised. AIPAC is as powerful as it is because of the powerful billionaires, themselves state parasites, who dump so much money into it. The Port Authority is Zionist central. That's why Steiner, too disgraced to continue even as president of AIPAC, can work at the Port Authority for over a decade now. It's a vicious cycle, just like U.S. foreign aid to Israel. The Port Authority positions allow state-assisted wealth, a portion of which is used to purchase political influence and continue the corporate welfare cycle. While Americans were losing their homes during the housing bubble, Zionist clans like the Kushners were buying up property and donating large sums to build illegal settlements in the West Bank. Free houses for the self-proclaimed chosen race of God. The current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has slept in Jared Kushner's bed. How many foreign heads of state spend the night at your house? You want to build a wall? Forget about the Mexican border. Build it around the Port Authority. They're wasting billions. And these real estate devils keep AIPAC afloat, which holds American foreign policy by the short hairs, which in turn waste trillions of dollars. The Trump families were no strangers to corruption and politics. Now President Donald Trump laid the foundation of Trump Tower using S&A concrete, a firm controlled by mafia underboss Anthony Salerno of the Giovesi crime syndicate back in 1981. In return, the mob kept the unions away. That they also control. In other words, racketeering. Not illegal, since all one is doing is hiring a concrete company. You can't prove how the unions, for say, steel, might have acted, and why. It's not clear that Trump knew he was dealing with the mafia or not, or that Fat Tony Salerno in particular was Genovese brass. However, they did share the same lawyer. It could also be the case of, get it done, and I don't want to know how. Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, as well as Donald Trump, were buttering up New York's mayor, Ed Koch, even though Donald would be butting heads with him later in the 80s. The New York government royally screwed up a construction project in Central Park. All they had to do was build an ice skating rink. There are many problems with it though. Rather than using brine water as a coolant to freeze the rink, the Parks Commissioner elected to use Freon, a chemical that was later banned out of air conditioners because of its depletion of O3 in the ozone. The concrete needed for the rink's floor was underestimated by a subcontractor, and they diluted the mixture. As a result, one part of the rink was 6 inches lower than the rest. Leave it to government to screw up a project as easy as an ice rink. While Donald Trump came to the rescue, he said he could have it finished by Christmas. He actually finished it by November, 2 months ahead of schedule and $775,000 under budget. He got the city to pay for the renovation, and the profits were all donated to charity. This really upped Trump's image, but it's something any developer could have done, really. He looks great. Compared to what, though? Government? Government can't do anything right. Of course a private developer can build something better than the government. The government is too worried about spreading revenues around to their friends, and hires people who are completely incompetent based on nepotism. A private business will go out of business if they can't at least do what they're supposed to be doing. They're full of corruption, sure, but they generally can build things. Prior to saving the ice rink, Donald Trump was no stranger to organized crime. In 1979, he used underpaid illegal Polish immigrants to take down the Bonwit Teller department store to make way for his Trump Tower. The House Wreckers Union local never lifted a finger. It was later shown by the New York State Organized Crime Task Force that the union had been controlled by the Genovese crime syndicate, the same faction Trump overpaid for ready-mix concrete to build his tower. Federal Judge Charles Stewart ruled that Trump had engaged in conspiracy to violate fiduciary duty and also fraud. He set damages at $325,000. The case was settled by negotiation and the agreement was sealed. Trump's liaison with the Genovese syndicate and Fat Tony Salerno appears to have been the mob lawyer Roy Cohn, who had also been the lawyer for starch anti-communist Senator Joseph McCarthy. Understand that the New York mob syndicates and the federal government have had a relationship for many decades. At first, because the mafia's narco business supply side was funding anti-communist militias, including KTM, and later anti-Castro Cubans. After that, they had the same gambit for paying the Contras and even Al-Qaeda, then called Freedom Fighters, and currently relabeled as moderate rebels. Aside from Salerno, Mr. Cohen's clients included fellows like Paul Castellano, Carmine Galante, a Genovese hitman and cop killer, as well as the infamous John Gotti of the Gambino crime family. Trump did business with the Gambino family too. In his book, The Art of the Deal, Trump describes how in 1987 he bought 93% of the voting stock in Resort International, a hotel casino company. This would pave the way for Trump to set up a legal gambling operation in Atlantic City, New Jersey. After the mafia lost Cuba to Castro and their casinos were shut down, they built up Las Vegas, largely from the Teamsters pension fund organized by Jimmy Hoffa and the Chicago outfit. The York families pushed their operations into Los Angeles and also New Jersey. Atlantic City was born in the 70s. New Jersey never really had the allure that Las Vegas did, though. Resorts International was an outgrowth of the Mary Carter Paint Company, an old CIA front set up by Allen Dulles that was involved in real estate deals with Meyer Lansky, and a merger with Crosby Miller, which had been acquired by three-term governor of New York, Thomas Dewey. Do you notice a pattern here between government, the mafia, and real estate? Trump's biggest customer in Atlantic City was Bob Labuti. Labuti was a racehorse swindler and a John Gotti underling. He was caught on tape in a probe referring to Gotti as his boss. He ended up being banned from all of New Jersey's casinos. The Gambinos were running booking operations in Atlantic City. Trump's casino was fined $450,000 for gifting Labuti 3 Ferraris, 3 Rolls-Royce, 2 Bentleys, and a Mercedes. At least he has good taste in cars. But when probed, Trump didn't recognize Labuti's name and said he hardly knew him. Another now billionaire friend of Trump's is Vince McMahon, the owner of World Wrestling Entertainment, formerly called the World Wrestling Federation, or WWF. In the early days of pro wrestling, the industry was floundering. Vince made an all-or-nothing wager on WrestleMania, essentially inventing pay-per-view. It was a huge success and became an annual event. Trump helped solidify the WWF by bringing WrestleMania 4 and 5 to Atlantic City in 1988 and 1989. Vince's wife, Linda McMahon, is now part of the Trump administration, serving as the head of his small business administration. Not that she isn't qualified, she probably is, Well, seated next to Donald Trump in the front row of WrestleMania 4 was Bob LaBooty, the mobster Trump hardly knew, whose name he couldn't recognize. As a side note, if you're interested in the mob's relations with pro wrestling, look up the story of Ricky Dawson, which involves the Yakuza, one of the Bushes, and ends in a bathroom stabbing. The syndicate now owns a baseball team. The Japanese mafia was also deep into the mixed martial arts organization called Pride, whose fighters were gobbled up by the US's UFC after Pride went under. The UFC was itself run by gambling giants who recently sold it off for $4 billion. But I like the UFC and WWE, so I'm not going to say anything bad about them. Plus, those aren't the kind of guys you want to piss off. Also of the Gambino syndicate was drug trafficker Joseph Weissenbald. Already convicted of 2 felonies, embezzlement and car theft, Joseph still got a job from none other than Donald Trump, and so did his brother. They were to fly helicopters to transport high rollers to and from Atlantic City's casinos. That's just what you want to give a cocaine smuggler, a helicopter. He flew them for 3 years until in 1985 he got his 3rd felony when he was busted moving 3/4 of a ton of marijuana. The case was moved to Judge Mary Ann Berry of New Jersey, formerly known as Mary Ann Trump, Donald Trump's sister. She recused herself, but Trump wrote a letter to the replacement judge, and Joe only ended up getting the light sentence of 3 years despite it being his 3rd felony. While in jail, his girlfriend bought 2 adjoining apartments in Trump Towers. That's called a legal payoff. There's more. Art smugglers, loan sharks, more racketeers. It's overkill. The press is so desperate to link the president to Russia, but doesn't explore the Italian and Jewish mob ties right under their nose. And that's because the Democrats are in it even deeper. For Ivanka Trump to marry ultra-Zionist Jared Kushner, it was as if the New York and New Jersey major real estate wings of organized crime just unified through marriage. Trump's lawyer and mafia liaison wasn't the only leftover McCarthyite with a history tied to the mob. Roy Cohn, as McCarthy's chief counsel, brought a young man into the fold as an unpaid consultant named Gerard Sheen, and they took a tour of Europe together. They even appeared on the cover together of C.D. Jackson's Time Life magazine, titled as McCarthy and His Men. Cohn was homosexual. Of course, he denied Sheen was his lover. Roger Stone, who was a campaign advisor to Donald Trump, worked with Cohn, and he said, "Roy was not gay. He was a man who liked having sex with other men. Gays are weak, effeminate. He always seemed to have these young boys around." Well, I can't agree with Stone's odd stereotype about homosexuals, but I'm pretty sure Cohn's sexuality is clear. And like McGreevy, or Hoover, being a closet homosexual is something that can be exploited. His lover Sheen was the Jewish heir to a hotel chain out of Chicago. Gerard David Sheen's father, Junius Meyer Sheen, owned the Ambassador Hotel, where Robert Kennedy was murdered. The hotel had allowed Jewish mobster Mickey Cohen to run a gambling operation out of it, which is odd since Sheen was a close personal friend of J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. Sheen owned the Miami Beach Gulfstream Hotel, where Edgar Hoover and his lover, Clyde Tolson, would vacation over Christmas, for free. Aside from gambling, Mickey Cohen, like Kushner, was big into sexual blackmail, especially of Hollywood celebrities. Cohen had been sent over by New York mobster Meyer Lansky, along with babyface Bugsy Siegel, to the West Coast territories. Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello, it is widely known, had incriminating photos of Hoover engaging in oral sex on the beach.
Attorney General Robert Kennedy paints a grim picture of the rise of lawlessness under the Cosa Nostra, or Mafia. This he describes as the government of organized gambling, narcotics peddling, extortion, racketeering, and controlling of certain trade unions. He says the income runs into billions.
Robert Kennedy prosecuted Cohen and sent him to Alcatraz. He was the only prisoner ever bailed out of Alcatraz, and his bond was signed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was later made the face of the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination of JFK. Interestingly, the senior counsel Warren Commission staffer responsible for looking into the backgrounds of Lee Harvey Oswald and Chicago mobster Jacob Rubenstein, or Jack Ruby, to ensure they both acted alone was Albert E. Jenner, an anti-Kennedy corporate lawyer for Henry Crown of Chicago. 13 years before JFK was shot, the Crown and Sheen families had united through marriage when Henry's son Lester married Meyer Sheen's daughter Renee, who is Gerard Sheen's sister. The Crown family owned controlling shares of the Dallas-Fort Worth aerospace defense company General Dynamics. Lyndon Johnson pushed for a multi-billion-dollar defense contract for the TFX-111 fighter jet that Kennedy and McNamara had cooked up before his assassination to go to General Dynamics. By all accounts, Boeing had the better bid for the plane, but it was given to the Crown family business for political reasons. For details on that can of worms, get my book, The Separation of Business and State. Johnson's advisor was Bobby Baker, who was investigated for bribery and for arranging sexual favors for congressmen in exchange for votes for government contracts. You see, what Kushner did was nothing new. Bobby Baker's activities started to unravel when a bug in the Las Vegas Fairmont Hotel office of another Lansky associate, Ed Livingston, picked up references to Baker. But because it involved so many prominent people, the investigation was limited, and inquiries into Johnson were dropped in 1963, and Baker was charged with tax evasion. The Kennedy assassinations require separate films. Suffice it to say, this triangle between big business, organized crime, and government spans back many decades. General Dynamics' Crown family has always been loyal to Israel. The Jewish Sympathy Orchestra plays in the Henry Crown Hall in Jerusalem. But Israel does like to name a forest or a street or some other dedication to political figures in the United States like James Jesus Angleton or why Rothschilds are on their money. Organized crime is international, and Zionist gangsters have state assistance. It gives them a huge advantage over other ethnic gangs. In 2016, Michael Cathell joined me on the ANC podcast to talk about disinformation and guilt by association, and he also talked about the Crown family and some of their modern associates.
I don't know if you've heard of George Fisher, and he was CEO for Motorola, and Motorola is controlled by the Crown family, who are the Chicago Jewish mob and backers of Obama, and Fisher himself was Henry Kravis's senior advisor. Kravis was the co-founder of Kravis, Kohlberg and Roberts, that led to the creation of leveraged buyouts that stripped more than $1 trillion out of American companies. And the Jewish mob targeted Motorola in the 60s to be able to compromise security for communication provided by Motorola. Apparently all first responder communication in the US was provided by Motorola. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, when...
That's where they're targeted by BDS, too.
By BDS?
Yeah, Motorola, Hewlett-Packard, and I think Caterpillar.
There are no billionaires without the state. Cronyism is rampant. But that's how you climb the ladder in the business world or in politics. Through corruption and collusion with state power. Listen, taxing or printing money to award it to companies who contribute part of the money you extract it from the productive part of society back to you, or contribute to you through a lobby like AIPAC, is not an act of genius. It doesn't require talent or cleverness either. It's just robbery. Floating the budgets of perpetually irresponsible gamblers, thus allowing them to buy up media and more politicians, isn't a sane fiscal policy, and the cycle can only be sustained for as long as people are kept in the dark about it. It can only remain in the dark for as long as people fear telling it like it is, because of the canard of anti-Semitism. Look, it's not the Illuminati or Bavarians polluting politics. It's a cabal of state-assisted Jewish Zionist billionaires using the state to maintain their wealth and in turn using the wealth to control politicians. They use bribery and blackmail and promote the compromised. The names and information packed in this film are only a tiny fraction of the endless corruption. And you won't hear any specifics from this blowhard. Alex Jonestown, who himself married a call girl and says prayers for the Prime Minister of Israel on his radio show.
The people's will, and to start a war if they have to, or even kill Trump and Netanyahu and you name it, to keep their world government project afloat. We are in the middle of the greatest crisis humanity has ever seen. It's time to pray. Our Heavenly Father, please help us open our eyes. Please help us be good. We're so sorry for all the abortions and all the evil in our name. Please protect the children. Please reprieve us if it's in your will. Please somehow stop the evil forces that are trying to stop this miracle that you've given us. Please help there be peace in the Middle East. Please stop those who are trying to overthrow Israel and start World War III and bring in Armageddon. Please give it
collectivists who conflate Zionist ideologues with the Jews in general. That's the opposition they want. Zionism is a parasite and a cancer. It's not good for Jewish people, and it's a lot bigger than Palestine's occupation. These neocons created the Iraq War and the war in Syria. Refugees aren't a side effect. They're a premeditated weapon. It goes back longer than just 9/11. I'm working on a JFK doc. That's when they really got their claws in the U.S.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible?
Oh, my God.
Do you want to break the cycle? Then join me. We've got to clean up the Port Authority, and if you live in New Jersey or New York, you've got to get active in state politics. Step 1 is sunshine, and at Anti-Neocons, our aim is just that. Truth costs far less than lies. Paint the town, the message is clear. We'll never be free until we end all aid to Israel.